I've seen my share of people destroyed by greed. We believe in you, Arch. Arch nodded, and no one said anything else. Their feelings were conveyed without words. Past arguments had cultivated trust. So, what do you think? There's a good chance something is ruling this tomb. Hecarim was examining the well-pruned undergrowth. The statues of angels and goddesses here and there were extraordinarily beautiful. It was clear at a glance that they, too, were given regular care. On the other hand, the branches of the huge trees towering around the graveyard were all drooping and bent. This gave the place an atmosphere of gloom itself. The gravestones were in straight lines and looked more like a witch's uneven teeth. They combined with the more neatly kept parts of the area to create severe discord. Someone is taking care of the graveyard. They just aren't sane. Hecarim arrived at this thought through gut instinct, and it made him cold. He turned his attention to the huge building to shake off his chills. The graveyard grounds contained a mausoleum in each cardinal direction. There was also a gigantic, magnificent one standing in the center. 8 fairly large warrior statues surrounded the large mausoleum. Their imposing presence made it feel as though they would turn away all calamity and fools who dared approach. The undergrowth is trimmed so neatly. There's not even any moss. Someone pretty particular is taking care of this place. I wonder what kind of person the teams present minus Tenbu had felt something strange from the moment they learned the nature of the request was a survey. Then they arrived, and the area was rolling plains as far as the eye could see. It was the most unsuitable place for a tomb. For starters, it was strange to build a tomb of this grandeur in such a remote place if anyone actually planned to use it. The location was too inconvenient. It was somewhat understandable if it was meant as a monument to convey the achievements of the deceased to future generations rather than a place to deify the dead. It was possible the tomb had been built at the site of some great deed as well, but in that case, it was strange that there was no historical evidence of that immortal achievement. With no clues emerging even after all the teams pooled their information, there was a good chance that it had been wiped from history. It didn't make sense. An alien feeling, like something was stuck in his throat, caused Hecarim to furrow his brow. This could end up being a huge incident, depending on who is in here. What'll we do about that? I'd hate if it was some innocent person's house. The members of each team, in charge of gathering knowledge, discussed this. The guild didn't have any information about ruins in this area, and since it is so far from the nearest village, the chance that a normal person is living here is really slim. That leaves either some kind of illegal squatter who can be out in the open, or a monster. Since there aren't any tracks outside the tomb, either the person inside doesn't need food or water, or the tomb is made in a way that someone living there can sustain themselves. But we don't have enough information. Speculating any further will just lead to stereotyping and narrowed thinking, so that's why we're going in. Information about ruins flowed from the Adventurers Guild to the government. The Discoverer retained the right to first survey the ruins for a set amount of time. If neither the state nor the guild had information about some ruins, killing an illegal squatter would be overlooked. In other words, it was a when in doubt, kill policy. Maybe it was a violent way to do things, but humans were weak in this world. They couldn't have some unknown building a nest right next door. Actually, 20 years earlier, great harm had come from the organization Zuranorn. They performed horrifying experiments while occupying some ruins. People did nothing because they didn't have enough information. As a result, an entire, albeit small city was destroyed. The guild had created their policy so that nothing like that would ever happen again. Well, if it fits the usual pattern, it'll be undead. If the tomb is occupied by undead, we need to defeat them and bless the place to get rid of the negative energy, right? As you know, yes, it's very important that we do that. If you leave undead alone, there is a chance stronger undead will spawn. That's why you often find powerful undead inside ruins. It'd be nice if it was just an abandoned tomb, and all that was in it were golems whose master had ordered them to keep the place tidy. That would be so much less trouble. What's our strategy? I think you should have gone to the meeting instead of me, Hecarim. Don't worry about it. None of the other team leaders were there, right? Everyone fulfills the role they were best suited for. Arch sighed conspicuously in response to Hecarim's wink. Once night falls, all teams will begin operations. We were going to invade from all 4 directions and meet at the huge mausoleum in the middle. I see. It'd be easy to spot us in daylight. Yeah, the area was open and they couldn't see any lookouts or travelers. It should have been fine to invade right then, but there was no telling what might happen. It would be a little safer to make their move in the dark. Also, if they continued observing the ruins, even only until night, they might learn something. This job had a time limit, but the brains of the teams had concluded it wouldn't be a waste to spend some of it observing. Really, they probably wanted to observe for a few days. Wouldn't we be able to scout safely if we used invisibility? We did consider that, but we figured it would be better to go in all at once, just in case something went wrong. We'll still be able to investigate a little bit. Invisibility wasn't a perfect spell. There were plenty of ways to see through it. If someone or something who knew what was in there guarding the ruins discovered a worker approaching with magic, the security level would increase as a matter of course. If they had bad luck, it was possible they wouldn't make it into the tomb at all. The plan must be to all move at once to avoid heightened security. Having understood that, Hecarim nodded. It had some holes, but it managed to balance danger and duty to the minimum acceptable level. So we ray on a break for now. Yeah, Raven, Black and Screaming Whip are on guard, but just in case, and to stay sharp for later, each team will take turns keeping an eye on things. The lineup is the order in which we reach the Countess' house. We'll switch every 2 hours. I see, so we ray last then. Yeah, we still have a while to go. With those words, she rotated her neck and scrunched her shoulders up and down. You seem tired. Arch nodded at Robodick. I am. It took so long because that horrible guy proposed we storm the place. It was so hard to convince him we shouldn't. The word cooperation is not in his dictionary. Oh, the fencing genius. You mean piece of shit bastard, Emina sneered, full of killing intent. Hecarim smiled awkwardly in response and made an effort to change the subject. So how about we go back to camp and take it easy until it's our turn? I approve of that idea. I don't think it will rain anytime soon, but we'd be sorry if we didn't take precautions. Miss Emina, that means we need you, so please don't keep that scary face on forever. Aye, that guy really irritates me. I just want to stab him to death. We're definitely pitching our tent nowhere near them. I have no problems with that as long as we ray inside the planned campground. Really, it was problematic, but he wasn't interested in pitching in their vicinity and then ending up in a fight. The 4 of them turned their backs to the ruins and set off walking. The more you think about it, the more mysterious it gets, and it makes sense that a count would make this request. When Hecarim turned around, Arch had stopped and was staring at the ruins. You can read anything about the era or background of these ruins just by looking at them. It's like they just appeared here out of nowhere. They seem so alien. I feel like those statues somewhat resemble the statues of this region from before the evil spirits rampaged, but that one over there seems more like something from the east, and considering the cross-grave markers, I give up. I have no idea. Listening to Arch expound, Hecarim held back a grin. He could barely contain his excitement. In other words, it means we could find some pretty neat stuff in there, without a doubt. I am sure there will be some surprises, but remember, everyone, the chance we encounter terrifying undead is also high. Ah, that is scary. You ray so bad at this, Hecarim. That didn't sound like me one bit. Actually, thanks to your forced imitation of my voice, I am creeped out for real. Ah, sorry. Even so, I'm kind of looking forward to this. Yeah, what is this tomb for? Who's buried here? It's the kind of stuff that really piques my intellectual curiosity. Right. It is exciting to experience the unknown. Know what else is exciting? Money. I hope there's a pile of it. Seeing the ear-to-ear smiles on his teammates' faces, Hecarim felt satisfied. They'd all gotten their hands dirty for one reason, money or another, but they didn't really want to. They preferred the type of jobs that adventurers did. He didn't know if Arch would be able to go adventuring once she took on the task of raising her sisters. If she left, it would take some time to find a new member, and even once they found one, it would take more time for them to get used to working together. During that time, they would have to take lower-level jobs. Maybe this job was the perfect final adventure for this group with these members. From now on, they would take more jobs like adventurers. Or maybe it wouldn't be bad to go in search of the unknown. Hecarim looked up at the sky. It seemed to go on forever. Once dusk had begun to envelop the world, The workers all came out of their well-camouflaged, low-to-the-ground tents. It was time for them to go to work. They engaged in clandestine jobs. The adventurers had begun preparing dinner. They set fire to white, solid fire starter and lit the charcoal. They concealed the light using darkness. Darkness could only cancel light, not hide the flames. With the flames blazing in the dark, they boiled water from a bottomless water skin. They poured the boiled water into wooden bowls. The portable food inside lost its shape. It began giving off the pleasant smell of soup. That plus crusty bread was their communal meal. Anything else was each person's preference. The bowls contained the yellowish soup workers loved for its emphasis on nutrition and shelf life. Some people added shavings of jerky. Some tossed in thinly sliced bits of meat. Others sprinkled seasonings. Still others just filled their stomachs with it as it was. Everyone finished up after eating a single bowl. Considering the strenuous work they were about to do, it was definitely not enough food. But eating anything too heavy wouldn't be good for performance. Still, it would be dangerous to eat nothing at all. They weren't sure when they would be able to have their next meal. They didn't have infinite emergency rations of portable food sticks, and carrying too much would slow them down. They needed to make a good compromise. After handing their empty bowls to the adventurers, the workers picked up the bags they'd been packing. The adventurers saw the workers off. Then all the teams began operations. The adventurers would guard the camp, not participate in the raid. First, the workers went around the hill to encircle the ruins. If they were attacked on the stairs, they were to send a signal into the sky. Many of them were wearing full-plate armor. One would think that between the noise and their sluggish movements, a covert operation would be impossible. But that's because common sense only goes so far. To those who used magic to defeat common sense, it wasn't impossible at all. By first casting silence to eradicate all sound within range, the creaks of their armor and their footfalls as they raced across the ground became inaudible. Next, invisibility. Using this spell made it extremely difficult for someone with regular vision to detect them. To be extra careful, rangers observed from the sky using invisibility, fly, and hawkeye. They had arrows enchanted with paralysis ready to deal with any incident. With this double-tiered formation, the parties reached their destinations. Now it was go time. They climbed the hill and then descended a few yards to the ruins. Each team would search the ground level along their way. They would meet at the central mausoleum. They needed to accomplish this while their invisibility spells were still in effect, to the extent possible. It was difficult to align their pace so that part of the group didn't rush on ahead of the others. It was also difficult to pinpoint everyone's locations at night, especially when they were all see-through. Luckily, they planned for that. Suddenly, strange rods around a foot long appeared on the ground. Then they floated into the air, as if invisible humans had picked them up. When they bent, they began to glow. These special rods' fluorescent sticks gave off light because of an alchemical reaction. This reaction happened when the rods were bent, and two special liquids inside mixed together. The workers had temporarily dropped them because invisibility spells affected everything they were carrying. To make the rods visible, they needed to be briefly separated from the items in their inventory. The lights moved side to side a few times. Then the rods were destroyed, as if they had performed their function. When the shining alchemical mixture was poured onto the ground, all trace of it disappeared as it hit the dirt. This confirmed that all the worker teams were ready to go. Though the teams were spaced out and couldn't see one another, 4 ropes were lowered to the surface level of the Great Tomb of Nazareth almost simultaneously. They were climbing ropes with knots at perfect intervals. The ends of the ropes were attached to pitons driven into the ground. They swung from these pitons, creaking. If someone with the ability to see the invisible had been present, they would have witnessed the figures climbing down the ropes. Even workers like Arch, who built up their magic skills and knowledge more than their bodies, and hadn't acquired skills that required nimble movements, could manage this level of exertion. Whether worker or adventurer, this level of physical ability was required. Their daily training and the knots in the rope served them well, and all the workers reached the graveyard without falling. Each team had one of the 4 smaller mausoleums as their first objective. Their invisibility spells wore off, and everyone appeared. Each team went sprinting toward their assigned mausoleum. They ran in a crouch through the gloomy graveyard, attempting to conceal themselves with gravestones, trees, and statues. The silence spells were still in effect, so they didn't make a sound. Even the warriors in full plate armor did their utmost to stay behind cover as they ran. Their brilliant maneuvers made them like shadows running across the earth. As the leader of Heavy Masher, Gringham, approached his team's mausoleum, his eyes widened slightly. It was an even more splendid building than he'd expected. The mausoleums in each cardinal direction were only small in comparison to the huge central one. Up close they were breathtakingly large and solemn. Its white walls were smooth. It looked as if a planer had been run over them. Although the building must have been built some time ago, there were no blemishes from the elements. There were no chips or cracks either. At the top of a 3-step marble stoop was a thick door. The door was well polished. There wasn't a spot of rust to be found. The black steel fairly gleamed. The amount of care that went into maintaining this building was clear. In other words, someone definitely had to be here, Gringham concluded. His thief teammate advanced to carefully inspect the stairs. They were communicating via hand signals since silence was still active. Gringham was told to stay back. He slowly retreated to avoid being caught in any area of effect trap. The thief was doing a painstakingly thorough investigation. Gringham was getting a little impatient, but that couldn't be helped. A person's soul resided in their flesh. When that flesh began to rot and fall off, they would be called to be with the gods. The dead went straight to the graveyard and were generally buried in the earth. However, the cases of some nobles and other privileged people were slightly different. If corpses were buried immediately, checking whether they had really decomposed required digging them back up. So to get visible proof that the corpses had rotted, they were left out to rest for a time. But no one wanted a corpse lying around in their house. So the graveyard's mausoleum was chosen as the resting venue. Once the corpse began to rot, a priest would witness that the person's soul had been called to be with the gods. The mausoleum's common space was generally used for this purpose. The spacious room would have a number of rock slabs, and the corpses were placed there to rest. The sight of a number of partially rotted corpses seemed terrible, but in this world it was completely natural. Still, when it came to the very wealthy and influential, such as great nobles, things were different again. Instead of a common burial space, they would be laid out in their family mausoleum. The mausoleums powerful people owned became symbols of their power. They would wait there for the gods' call. It was not uncommon for the buildings to be furnished and decorated with treasures. In other words, a wealthy person's mausoleum was like a vault full of riches for a grave robber. For that reason, the buildings were often fitted with dangerous traps to keep raiders away. Hence, there was extra precaution in investigating this tomb. It was so luxurious. Just as the thief finished inspecting the stairs and was about to move on to the door, the sounds in the area suddenly returned. Their silence spells had worn off. It was good timing for it. The thief noiselessly approached the door and resumed his close examination. Finally, he placed something like a cup against the door to listen for any noises on the other side. After a few seconds, he shook his head at the others. That meant there was nothing there. The thief himself cocked his head in doubt a couple of times. It was strange that the door wasn't even locked, but if there was nothing left for him to discover, then the rest was up to the vanguard. When Gringham stepped forward, the thief, having oiled the door, put his hand to it. Right behind the thief was a warrior with a shield. Gringham abruptly shoved the door, and it slowly cracked open. Whether thanks to the thief's oil or the methodical care of whoever looked after this place, the door fell away fairly smoothly for its weight. The warrior standing by Gringham moved between him and the entrance to defend against any sudden ambush or trap, but the door opened all the way up without spewing any arrows or other projectiles. A gaping darkness appeared before Heavy Masher. Continual light. An arcane caster's staff glowed with magical light. It was possible to control the level of brightness to some extent, so the caster brought the mausoleum's interior into view. With another cast of the spell, the warrior's weapon also began to shine. Illuminated by the two lights, the place could have been mistaken for a room in a noble or even royal mansion. In the center was a white stone coffin that could have doubled as the altar in a shrine. It was over 8 feet long and covered in carvings. These carvings were elaborate without being gaudy. In each of the room's 4 corners stood a white statue. Each statue was clad in armor and outfitted with a sword and shield. And then, does anyone know what that crest might be? Nope, no idea. A flag with a crest embroidered on it in gold thread hung on the wall. Gringham had never seen the crest before. If a caster and thief, who had memorized most noble family crests, even those from other countries, didn't recognize it, he figured the conclusion was valid. It wasn't a kingdom noble crest. Maybe it the crest of a noble from before the kingdom was established. Thou believest it from over 200 years ago. Many countries had been destroyed by the evil spirits 200 years ago. In fact, quite a few countries in the area had a history of more than that. The kingdom, the sacred kingdom, the council state, and the empire had all been established in the past 200 years. If that were the case, what would that have to be made out of to survive so beautifully after all these years with nary a blemish? It's probably protected with preservation magic, don't you think?